live on YouTube, and I am going to pass control over to Dr. Julie.
Fantastic.
I don't remember us filming the other ones we did.
We generally did not. However, public were allowed to attend in person. And since they can't, this is the only way for people to actually view it. So.
Okay.
Although as of today, your meetings are not at all limited by the governor's executive orders.
Wait, Gwen, say that again?
That
Sorry.
legislative bodies, the courts, including boards of education, are not limited.
Okay, so just so you know, we got something from our attorney in direct contradiction to that today, saying that we are.
They sent it to us from legal and said, you're absolutely not. Boards of education are excluded. Said, well, that I guess means we're all expendable.
Okay, so I know we have to start the
We're
meeting, but guys,
public now, so let me open the meeting.
Yeah, good idea.
All right.
Yes.
This is the
You're
Board
right.
of Education special meeting for which adequate notice under the Open Publics Meeting Act was provided by written notice on November 12th, 2020 to the Courier News, the Echo Sentinel, the Star Ledger, Tappan to Warren, and the clerks of the Borough of Watchung and the townships of Greenbrook, Long Hill, and Warren. Roll call, please, Mr. Stice.
Dr. Chand,
Yes.
Mr. Fallon, Mr. Hayek, Mr. Hunsinger,
Yeah.
Mr. Morrison,
Here.
Mrs. Ober,
Here.
Ms. Potter, Dr. Shabilsky,
Here.
Ms. Raban, and Ms. Barone.
Here. Can you please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance? Flag will show up.
yep, I will share that right now.
Pledge allegiance
To the
Flag
of the
United
United
States of America
and to the
to the
republic
republic for which it
which it
stands,
stands
one
one
nation,
nation,
under
under
God,
God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
liberty,
liberty,
and justice for all.
for all.
Okay.
So on the agenda is an opportunity for public comment first. So I guess I have to open that up first to allow them to comment on anything they want to. I'm a little lost with that in this type of agenda.
So for this agenda, yes, this is public comment on anything.
Okay.
Just because we have to, whenever we have a meeting, regardless of the purpose, we always have to allow one public comment. So
Okay.
I will, so as usual, folks should log into Zoom if they want to make a public comment. And since there's a little bit of a delay with our YouTube broadcast, I will give them a minute or so. Although I wouldn't really anticipate any public comment. And Freddie is trying to join us. He's just having some Wi-Fi issues.
Okay, great. He's participating to the end.
Right. So there is nobody looking to enter our Zoom.
Okay. All right, I will close the opportunity for public comment, and we can go into our board discussion. So I'm going to turn it over to Gwen Thornton. And you can take us through, I mean, the way we have it on the agenda is board self-eval, board roles and responsibilities, and then board goals. But whichever way you think is best to proceed through is fine.
Okay, if I can just share my screen. Can you see that?
Nope.
Nope. Okay, bear with me for 1 second. There's it. Okay.
And she has the ability as a participant to, okay.
For some reason, I don't know why it's not opening.
And Freddie just joined us.
Yeah, it's up Freddie.
Yeah, I'm
Oh, look,
sorry.
he's in San Francisco.
I gotta take that down since I'm before. My apologies being for late. I had some issues with my Wi-Fi.
Okay.
We're just getting started, so your timing's perfect.
For some reason, I'm having great difficulty.
Oh. Your screen is shared now, Gwen.
Oh, good.
So we see, like, I guess your desktop.
Which is great because I can't see you guys at all. Now I can see. There we go.
Maybe minimize that.
I am trying
No, the
to.
left,
The
left of
the
that.
line. The
Just
no,
little
I mean the
minimize.
Next to
The
the X.
little,
next to the box next to the X.
yeah.
There we go.
Thank you. You would think I would be more wide awake than that, but I don't have my glasses on because the screen's big enough that I can see it. So, thank
Could you
you.
maximize your screen? Could you maximize your screen, please? You know, this icon here at the bottom, click on that.
It might be you, Naresh,
It is.
because it's maximized
Yeah.
on mine.
Yeah, mine too.
You have to start this, yeah. So you're not in like slideshow, you're like in the, but that, I don't think that makes a difference.
Yeah, I know I can do that. Okay.
Well, it'll make it bigger.
From beginning, yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
There we
you
go.
Yeah.
There we go. But then I can't see all of you. So, but as long as you can see the slides, that's what. So it's a pleasure to be here. I think I know everyone that's there. It is nice to be back. And I did put together, Rita, according to what you wanted, an agenda around reviewing your self-evaluation. And we're going to do that by looking at some charts that I put together. And truly, you know, the value of a self-evaluation is that in looking back over the course of the year, it would help the district to move forward and the board to move forward. So it is a best practice. And I'm delighted that the board decided to continue to engage in this practice, and it's one we would continue to recommend. So the first part of the self-evaluation asks you to look at relative value. What are the most important tasks? And they're broken out into your areas of responsibility. And this chart shows you what you identified as being most valuable, but then how you rated the board. So for example, you identified the most important responsibility that you have, the relative value in planning was the highest at 3.9. But the board's performance in that particular area, while you rated it as being most important, you only rated the board's functioning in that area at a 3.2, which is still very high performing. But this is just to give you an indication to show you what you said were the most important pieces to your responsibility. And so you identified planning as being your most important, followed by student achievement, finance and the board superintendent relationship, and then board operations and board performance, and policy being the least important as you go through all of the pieces around your responsibility. And so I think that that's very helpful for you to just know what you saw as most important and then how the board performed against that area. So if you look at the board staff relationships, you can see that the board performance equaled what you said was the relative value of that particular function that the board serves. The second chart that we put together is a little more interesting typically for boards because it looks at how you rated the board and then how you rated your own individual performance. And so in 6 of the areas, you can see that you rated your individual performance higher than you rated the performance of the board. I have some boards that rate all 9 areas individually as being higher than the performance of the board, which goes to, I know what I'm doing, it's the rest of you that don't have a clue. But that's not the case.
Sounds right.
So, which I'm glad to see because it says to me, at least you realistically thought about it. your individual performance as you were rating the board and rating yourself. And so I think it's important to know that, at least in the areas of finance, board operations, board superintendent relationships, you rated the board's performance better than you rated your own individual performance. So I think that that's a testament to probably your business administrator and superintendent, and the way that they have helped the district to be effective and run in a fiscally responsible way in spite of the additional expenditures with COVID, which I know have been problematic this year. You made a lot of individual comments, and Rita has forwarded to you the compilation, so you'll have an opportunity to read through those at some point. I think it's helpful to read through those for you to see. But I know that you identified, and we're going to talk about that later on when we talk about board goals for next year. You identified what you saw as the challenges, and then what you said as a group you thought collectively you would benefit from more professional development in what specific areas. So I thought before we talked about district goals, it would be helpful to talk about what are your roles in the various areas, so that that would be very helpful. That also aligns to one of your 2 board goals from last year around additional professional development in terms of your roles and responsibilities. So, boards of education have 4 major functions, 4 major areas: policy, planning, appraisal, and I would say appraisal and oversight, and then communication. And those really are the 4 functions that a Board of Education serves in every school district. And policy is exactly what it says it is. It's to provide active policy, both new and revisions to existing, to ensure that you're in compliance with all state and federal laws. Planning in terms of providing quality instruction and a quality co-curricular program to all of your students to meet the needs of all students. Not an easy thing to do during this particular time frame, but your district obviously has been making great strides in that area, as every district has since we began this last March. Your appraisal really has to do with the effective management of the district, and you do that through your 1 employee, which is the superintendent, and you do that annual evaluation. Lastly, providing 2-way communication between the community and the board. You're a conduit for all of your communities, and it's a little more challenging because you have multiple communities in your school district. As a regional high school, it's not just 1 community, but it's all of them, which I think is a little more challenging than for some districts where you were serving 1 community. You have to be aware and tuned into multiple communities at all times. So, by definition, the Board of Education is a policy-making body, and it really is important to recognize that authority rests with the body, not the individual. In other words, with the policy that's developed by the full board, which becomes a roadmap for your students, your staff, and all of your communities to understand the parameters within which they must operate. And they really are the written expression of your aspirations for your students. This year, for example, you had to develop brand new policies around COVID, which is heretofore not something that you had to do. They didn't exist in anybody's policy manual because we had never had a pandemic in more than close to 100 years. So, being up to date on your policy is something that's critically important. It should be the first question you ask before you make a decision as a board member. What does our policy say? What does it prescribe? And keeping up to date and having revisions to your policy is a prerequisite for CUSAC. CUSAC was suspended in 2019-20 due to the pandemic, and it wasn't carried out, but the state has said that CUSAC must be conducted this year. So if you're not being actively CUSAC, you have to make sure that you're continuing to revise your policy manual. So, it is your responsibility. It defines and guides and aligns administrative responsibilities. And again, it provides another way to establish oversight and evaluation procedures. for staff and for the superintendent. Policies are supported by regulations. Regulations are typically developed by your administration to implement the board's policy. Typically, boards don't require, regs don't have to be approved by the Board of Education, although some Board of Educations do approve regulations, and they are a way of providing direction for administrative decision and district procedures. They carry out the intent of your policies. So the policies are the broad statements and the regulations are the implementation pieces to it. They're the how. As you know, the Board of Education says what they want to have happen through the development of policy, through setting district goals, and the how that happens is the responsibility of your administrative team. You have board bylaws, which really speak to the way you operate, and it is something that's important because they're your internal governance structure and rules and pieces. Obviously, they're impacted by the Open Public Meetings Law, the School Ethics Act, and case law, but they do prevent arbitrary and capricious actions on behalf of boards. So making sure that your bylaws are up to date and reflect your current practices is something that is very valuable to look at. Most boards only look at them at reorganization when they reapprove the entire policy manual, when they approve the curriculum, but it is something that you should be thinking about. Your planning function is to ensure effective teaching and learning is taking place, and you have some important obligations in that area. One of those planning pieces is your budget, and really your budget is just the financial expression of your goals and the goals incorporated in your strategic plan. So you are responsible for identifying with administrative input your current needs, setting budget parameters. As you know, you have a 2% tax cap levy, and you want to make sure that the board has discussed what that impact is, what going to a 2% tax cap levy looks like. If you don't go to that, what it would look like, what it would require you to remove from your budget, how it would impact students, how it would impact the taxes for your communities. You're responsible for setting and keeping to a calendar for the execution of your budget to make sure you hit all of those deadlines for the county. And I'm sure Tim puts that budget calendar together with your board to make sure that you are hitting all of the key dates. You've always been responsible for holding a public hearing, even though if you stay at the 2% tax cap levy or under, or over if you have bank cap at all left, you still have to hold a public hearing on the budget. And then of course you're responsible for approving the budget once it is complete. But that is one of the ways that the board does provide oversight is through the development of the budget and ensuring that you are providing for a thorough and efficient education and beyond, obviously in your district, for all students. You're required to approve all courses of study, including all textbooks and materials. And you must be able to demonstrate that your curriculum will assist students in meeting the New Jersey student learning standards. This is really the bare minimum of your responsibility in that area. Obviously, I'm sure that your curriculum goes far beyond just meeting the New Jersey student learning standards. Also, in terms of planning your annual goal setting, I know you have in place a strategic plan from which you pull your annual goals, but that goal setting is very important. It provides an objective basis for evaluating the superintendent, but it really helps you to establish your priorities. And those board goals are around program instruction, staff, PD, finance, facilities. They hit every area of the district. And so that part of it, setting those goals regularly and talking about them and getting updates at progress toward achieving those goals are important for your community, but also for the board in terms of your overall responsibility. Okay? And really, you know, you have a strategic plan which creates a shared vision, which charts the course of the district for the next 3 to 5 years typically. I know you're in process of renewing your strategic plan and working toward that end. Clearly, that is much more difficult in this remote environment than it is in person, but it is a really important document to have in place because it does provide, again, a framework for your decision making. Okay. When it talks about the role of the board in appraisal, it's really provide you with just a little bit of an overview of why you would evaluate. And you only have one employee, which is something that I know a lot of boards struggle with, but that is the superintendent. And a good evaluation is a communication tool. It looks at what the strategic goals are and what progress has been made, the leadership skills, fiscal management, policy development, all of those pieces. And there's a whole evaluation cycle, which I know that you all are familiar with. And typically, boards of education will do their self-eval following the superintendent eval, although there are many boards that have now moved the self-eval to this time frame prior to the end of a board year, because now the board year begins in January. It used to begin in May when we had April elections. So it made sense to do your self-evaluation following the superintendent's evaluation and use it to set board goals for the school year. But with the change of the election to November and the installation of the new board in January with beginning of a board year that runs January 1 to the following January, doing the self-eval now, looking back at the entire school year can be very helpful as well. So either way is really fine. But evaluating your superintendent is important because it really does clarify the division of labor between the Board of Education and the superintendent, who is your CEO. It clarifies those leadership roles and helps keep those lanes clear as to who does what, in meaning you're responsible for saying what you want to have happen, but the responsibility lies with your superintendent for making it happen. It helps to develop a positive working relationship and creates a common understanding. And I think it is most useful to do it because it does provide accountability. It says to your community, we are accountable for what happens in the district in terms of driving school improvement and student achievement, recognizing what has gone well, what you've accomplished, highlighting focus areas that you've worked on over the course of the past year, and setting annual priorities for moving forward for the following school year. So those pieces are inexorably tied together, the goal setting and the evaluation, because those goals provide the objective basis for the superintendent's evaluation. The last piece to your responsibility, and this is one that can be a struggle, which is something boards wrestle with all the time, is providing two-way communication between your communities and the board. Boards of education have always been very adroit at putting information out. We have probably been less agile in having those two-way conversations and providing opportunities for that. Strategic planning is a wonderful way to get input from your community, from all of your communities, including your staff and your students. But this is a responsibility that is challenging at times because you have a dual role. You are representatives of your local community, but you are also the school's ambassadors to the community. So it's a dual role. Sometimes that's very difficult to juggle, but it's important that you do that as well. And you do have a responsibility to listen to all citizens and to explain to those who might have a particular point of view, the needs of the school system as a whole. Oftentimes, there may be groups who have a particular agenda or something specific in mind that has been more beneficial to one group of students than another. But you have to be able to balance the needs of all students within the school district, not one group or another. You are legally bound to represent the best interests of every child in all of the communities that you represent. And sometimes that is a difficult piece. I think one beneficial aspect, and there are not many, of this current situation where we are in remote learning and we can't be in person together, is that we have had more public participation in board meetings, which I think has helped really for the public to know and understand how boards of education function and operate. I think for a lot of the public heretofore, it has been a little bit mysterious, not on purpose, but because it required them to get up, get dressed, go out, come to a meeting. Now they can listen from at home, watch it on Facebook, watch it on Zoom, whatever venue that you happen to be using. So I think that that has been really helpful for boards of education to have had greater level of public participation. And so that the public has a better understanding of why you are making the decisions you are making and why you are operating the way that you are operating, because they can see it for themselves. So just in summary, the board's roles and responsibilities are really around developing a shared vision and mission, developing goals and policy, for determining what end results you would like to see happen, the what, why you want it to be that way, and then you vote on it, you take action. And your superintendent's really responsible for turning that vision and those goals into objectives, procedures to implement policy, action plans to move goals forward, regulations again to implement policy, and figuring out the means. How are they going to do it? Who will be involved, when it will take place, by whom, and they recommend and implement. So it is based hugely on communication between the board and the administration, particularly your superintendent. Your superintendent is held accountable by the board, and she holds all other employees accountable for their performance in helping the district to move forward. So clearly the role of the board, and we say this, and I've said it, I lost count over the 19 years I've been doing this, is to see that the schools are well run, not to run the schools. And sometimes lines can become blurred. I think this year in particular, because of COVID and the need to put together a plan for the return, the road back, as it were, to school, boards were a little more actively involved in some areas than they ordinarily would have been involved with. And so recognizing that as you move forward, as we normalize processes and procedures for remote or for hybrid or for the back and forth between the two, because none of us knows what that's going to look like moving forward as we're starting to ramp back up, unfortunately, as a state. We also know that there's a vaccine on the horizon, which is really exciting news. And so hopefully we will be able to return to some level of a new normal at some point in time. But it's important for you to recognize that it's not your job to administer the schools, but to ensure that they're well run. And of course, you are always bound by the code of ethics. And I'm not going to go through and read all of these to you, but I would be remiss if I didn't remind the board that you're required to enforce and uphold all the laws. You're required to maintain confidentiality where appropriate, confine your action to policymaking, planning, and appraisal, which we've just been talking about. Recognizing that authority rests with the majority of the full Board of Education, not with any individual board member, and making sure that you refuse to surrender your judgment or use the schools for personal gain or for a particular group, and responsible to refer all complaints to the Chief Administrative Officer and only involve yourself as a full board after the failure of an administrative solution. So, it all holds together when you think about it in terms of planning, policy planning, oversight, and communication in terms of the roles of the board. And so having specific board goals can be as important as having good district goals, because board goals look at how you can improve your governance function. They improve communication. They say to your community that you're holding yourselves accountable as a board for your performance, and it can help to build a more cohesive team among and between board members. And so you've seen this slide before. I put it up again only to show that board goals, while they do refer to your processes and procedures, should support the district goals. As you improve your governance and your processes and your procedures and how you operate, it is supportive of the administrative efforts that are taking place to move student learning forward. You have a vision statement, and again, I'm not going to read it. It's up on your website. I wasn't able to capture the graphic, which I love.
It's good because it's changing.
Oh, bummer. I really like that one. Is it better, Bob?
I mean, I believe so. The Strategic Planning Committee has done a really good job, which we're going to be unveiling in the next week or so.
Okay, well, I'm glad that I didn't then put it up since it's going to change. And that's not a bad thing. Change is a good thing. I look forward to seeing it because I thought the previous one was really wonderful. Here are your 2 goals from this past year, that you would engage in professional development focused around the board's role in enhancing student learning. And then the second one is you would work to further develop coordination and shared services with your constituent and sending districts. That probably has become a little more challenging in this remote time. But the one thing that we do need to keep in mind, I think, for boards, which is a little more difficult now, is that we have to think about the future, and you are thinking about the future with your strategic plan. But really, you know, we just can't live in the moment. And while I know it's stressful in the moment for governance, I hear that from all of my board members as to how difficult this has all been. We also have to continue to keep our eyes looking forward and looking ahead. And so I commend you for continuing with the strategic plan and looking forward. And maybe this part of this coordination on shared services will find expression through your next strategic plan as well, because it is a very valuable goal, I think, to have had. I don't know how far you got with it, just given the interruption in March of last year toward moving that forward. So in thinking about having board goals for this year, in considering, you might want to consider what professional development you think would be helpful. What professional development does your self-eval indicate that you would benefit from? What PD you might think would be supportive of your board goals, and whether those goals will support the district goals, just in terms of thinking about those. So, you know, what can your board do to be more effective in the areas of your responsibility, policy, oversight, ensuring a comprehensive curriculum and instructional program, communications, both internal and external, among and between yourselves, and then with your communities. And then here are some just sample goals that some boards have adopted. I will freely admit that I bolded the first suggested goal here and would suggest it for your board, and that is to complete the superintendent's evaluation within the statutory timeline. Primarily because it's important to, and respectful of your superintendent to do it in a timely way at the end of the school year, but it is also a CUSAC requirement, and districts are losing points, 7 to be exact, for failure to complete it by July 1st. This past year, the governor, because of the pandemic, extended the deadline to July 31st. But it's something that your board seems to struggle with on an annual basis. So one of the ways that you might want to handle it is to develop an action plan that includes a calendar for the evaluation of the superintendent, so that everyone, once you reorganize, you could develop that calendar and share those dates ahead of time to ensure that all board members completed the process in a timely way. Secondly, review, here's a suggestion, and this one is primarily around equity, which is a huge piece for a lot of districts right now. Looking at your policy to review and revise to reduce systemic barriers so that students and staff, that there are equitable processes and practices for all students and staff. One of you mentioned the difficulty in moving through perhaps various tracks at the high school, whether you were an academic or AP or college prep and so forth, and that all students should have access to all aspects of the full curriculum and co-curricular program. And that's really an equity piece. Committing to an action plan review, periodic updates to the board on district goal and the progress. That again is just a suggested goal that may not apply to your district at all. Providing support and resources to your chief school administrator toward the achievement of district goals. But I do believe from reading your self-eval that you are, through your budget, providing that support. Committing to reducing distractions and increasing the efficiency of discussions in order to reduce the length of board meetings. There were some comments around making sure that questions were asked ahead of in committee and ahead of meetings so as to reduce not discussion, but redundancy and duplication of explanations. Reviewing your board governance practices and investigating various trainings, perhaps to become a certified board. And then there were also comments as well around enhancing and expanding communication with all stakeholders, and what is the appropriate role for the board in terms of communicating with staff, and how does that board effectively get out accurate, timely communications to all of the staff when perhaps they are not receiving it through no fault of the boards or administration. So you may want to consider what you see as your recent strengths and achievements. What do you do well? What focus do you want? What would enhance your board performance? So I would ask all of you, I've been doing all of the talking, but it's really important for you to consider what you think would be valuable district goals, board goals for the 2021 school year as we approach 2021, which frankly can't come quick enough for me.
The shared screen, can we see if somebody's raising their hand, Liz? I can't
either.
I can see if they raise their virtual hand in the
Okay.
participant box. And actually, there we go. Bob has his virtual hand raised. And what I'll do is I'll scroll through.
Oh, I see the partition box. I had to open that up.
And if other
Okay.
people raise it in their screen, I'll kind of scroll through just in case anyone is having trouble with the virtual hand.
Okay.
Well, what I can do is I can stop sharing so that you can all be seen on screen.
Yeah, that might be a little bit easier, I think.
And that will be far easier, and then you can see one another. And so you can see and you can speak. Bob, you had
So yeah, I just have I guess the one suggested goal that you appropriately bolded regarding the superintendent evaluation. While I recognize that that is something that needs to be addressed, it seems to be like a terrible thing to waste on a board goal. We've got a calendar, just do the work. And if we have to start the evaluation process tomorrow, then let's do it tomorrow so we can get it done by July. But I mean, and I said this in our evaluation, it's not only do we have to do it for CUSAC, it is not fair to the superintendent.
I would agree. I only bolded it because it's something that over time I've noticed seems to be something that is a bit of a stumbling block. That was all.
And if I could just put out to the board, seeing as of all years too, where we want to try and get that done. Of course, I'm going to be on leave for a couple of months. So maybe we can touch base before I go just on what you'd like that timeline to look like this year. So that way I can make sure in terms of when you want me to prepare stuff for that, and how we want to address that this year, you know, in terms of me being gone and returning. So that way, when I come back, we're not all of a sudden trying to scramble to get that done.
And then I think related, not related to that, but also, you know, I wonder to what degree, you know, as part of this process, is there, I mean, we only had 2 board goals before. There's one, the one on, you know, coordinating with districts has been one that has been an ongoing one. And we've made progress in fits and starts, and it's kind of morphed. So I don't know, do we start with, hey, do we carry any of these over, or do we just start fresh and then start adding additional ones, just as a thought?
And you can carry, some boards will carry over a goal if they believe that there's value in doing it and they haven't achieved it to its ultimate goal, to the ultimate end that they desired. So certainly carrying it over is never a problem.
Bob, you had a thumbs up on that one from Dr. Shabilsky, just in case you didn't see it.
Got it. Thank you.
Rita, Naresh had his actual hand raised.
Yeah.
She had her virtual hand raised, just so you know.
Okay, Naresh, go ahead.
Yeah, so I just need some clarification from you because I'm a new member and I'm trying to learn. I myself have no children in the school, and I joined the board just to contribute to see if I could make a difference. I do have grandchildren. I thought that I could connect with my grandchildren better. But in your 4 functions of the board, the last function was communication or interface with the community, right? And you repeated that a few times. But I found that as a board member, I was in our Warren School board last year and this year here. But I find that thing, we don't practice that. We have no communication with our community. And at the same time, in one of your slides, you mentioned that we are the ambassadors, of the board, to interface the community. But at the same time, we are not supposed to interact with the community. We are supposed to advise them to talk to the administration if they have any issue. So I'm confused on this particular issue. Can't hear you. You're
I'm sorry. I put myself on mute so there'd be no feedback. I think this year you've probably communicated more with your communities than probably in years past, just by virtue of all of the information you've had to get out to them and all of the questions you've responded to from parents who've been on your meetings and rightfully had questions and concerns. So, the communication piece, when we say you have to communicate with your community, you can talk to your community at any time and should about the wonderful kinds of things that are happening in your district. And if there are concerns expressed by community members, you certainly can bring them forward to the board if you think it has widespread application, or you can encourage parents to reach out to the appropriate person in the district to speak with if they have a concern regarding the district or an issue, and directing the community members, parents, grandparents up the chain of command to speak with the appropriate person is advisable in terms of communicating with your community. Someone mentioned in the self-eval, it would be wonderful to have an effective communications plan, but a communications plan that is really going to be orchestrated, A, has cost, but B, probably has a lot of administrative time tied into it, for which your administration currently does not have someone devoted to that. And the state really doesn't, as virtually outlawed districts having someone solely devoted to communications and public relations, as it were, which may sound negative, public relations. I don't mean it in a negative way, but in reaching out and engaging communities. So that has made the job of the board more difficult, but at the same time, even more important to have those kinds of two-way communications with the community and to get their input and feedback and provide opportunities for your communities to provide feedback to the district, whether it's through a culture and climate survey for families, or for students or for staff that is focused around, what are we doing really well? Where do we need to provide additional focus? And that is one way to do it that many districts have begun doing on a, semi-annual or annual basis or biannual basis. Some districts will do the community one year, the staff the following year. They will do the students every year to get their feedback around how they see the district, what they perceive as your strengths, what they perceive as your challenges, and what they would like to see happen within the school community.
Gwen, can I just for some clarification, I think sometimes it's confusion with communication as to what is the board communicating versus what can an individual board member communicate and that interplay, right? So I'm walking through ShopRite and somebody stops me and starts to talk to me. What am I supposed to do in that situation? How, or if I get an email directly to me as a board member, what am I supposed to do with that in that situation? And can I go to other meetings and start as an individual board member telling people what the board's position is on things? So I think that's a little bit where sometimes the line gets a little bit confused.
Okay, so I'm sure that you have policy says that the board president is the spokesperson on behalf of the board. So all official communications that come out on behalf of the board that the board has agreed to and has a public position on, you are certainly the one authorized to communicate that to the public. So that's pretty clear. And the superintendent speaks on behalf of the district. If it's a board position and it's a decision the board has reached and a member of the public asks you a particular question about it and the board has voted and spoken on it, and the position is clear, you certainly can share that with a member of the public that stops you in the frozen food section, always the frozen food section. So frozen in the ShopRite, but you certainly can communicate anything like that. If a community member has a question or a complaint, you can listen to them. And then the role of the board member is to really guide the person to the appropriate person that they should contact. The best thing you as a board member can do is to provide community members the road to access the system because they may not know where to go with a particular issue or a concern. And it doesn't even have to be a major complaint. It can be just a question that they want a response to. And so what you as a board member can do individually is say, here's who you would contact. We're having a busing problem. The bus is always late. Who do I talk to about that? So it may be you can direct them, guide them to the right office to contact so that they can get an answer to your question. You're not there to solve their problems. You can listen, you can be empathetic, you can be understanding. I encourage all of that, but you also then can provide them with the access. How do I get my issue, my concern addressed? Who do I speak to? Because you can't move your child, their kids section from first thing in the morning to last thing in the day because they're unhappy about their kid's schedule. Board members are not problem solvers for individual members of your communities, right? But you can help them to get their issues and their concerns answered. I mean, does that help, Rita, to understand what that?
I think so. I mean, so for example, we just had a resolution that was passed on a mascot. So if somebody came up to you in the ShopRite and said, what's this whole thing about the mascot? You could say that decision was made based on the resolution that this is best for the kids and the diversity of the school, whatever our reasoning was, explain it and say, we decided to retire our mascot. And we're going to get a committee together to find a new one or something like that. Right. So that would be something because we passed a resolution on, you could say that to somebody in the ShopRite.
and that's perfectly appropriate because you've already taken public action. If you hadn't taken public action and someone wanted to comment on it to you, that you were anticipating looking at the mascot for whatever set of reasons, you could certainly say, I would encourage you to come to the board meeting and express how you feel about that particular issue. No decision has been made. And so, once the decision has been made, though, as a board member, you need to support the decision of the board. So while you might not have agreed with retiring the mascot, you may have wanted to keep it personally as a board member, but the majority of the board has said we're changing, we're retiring the mascot, we're going to make a change. Then it is up to you. It is your responsibility as a board member to say, the board has made a decision. I support the board. You don't have to be a cheerleader for it and say, I think it's the greatest thing that they've ever done, but you do have to support the decisions of the board. Good boardsmanship says we govern through majority rule, and when the majority has made a decision, you live with that decision and you move forward, because the next time you might be on the winning side versus the losing side. So it's important to keep that in mind.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that with that in context, I think that helps, like with a concrete example.
Yeah, but there's a follow-up point on this one. You said that we should direct the person where the help is, but oftentimes these individuals, they are afraid to approach the administrator. They feel that their child would be victimized, and they expect the board member to be their ambassador.
Right. I understand that. I understand.
And that's where my problem is, that many times I say, hey, just call superintendent, just call the principal, just call the teacher, talk to them, but they are afraid to do that. And which is a big problem, They complain, but at the same time, they don't want to take action.
Right. So it would be much easier to have you solve their problem for them.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, but
They
that's
want
not
me
your
to be the
job.
ambassador,
That's not your job. And you need to explain to them that while you understand they have this concern, it is not the role of the board, of a board member, to involve themselves in issues that they may have, because if it were to get to the board table and you had involved yourself way back when, you would have to recuse yourself and not participate if there were a failure of an administrative solution. And, sometimes parents are afraid. I find most often it's that they would like someone else to address their issues for them, because it's a lot easier than having to be diplomatic and deal with the situation. Educators don't get into the business of educating children to take retribution against kids. So I don't find that to have that argument to be very, hold a lot of water. I think it's pretty specious to say, I'm afraid they'll take it out of my child. That's not been my experience over the years as either a board member, a teacher, a parent, or a grandparent. Educators do what they do because they love kids. So, parents sometimes have to man up or woman up, depending if you don't want to be sexist, and take the bull by the horns. And what you can do, again, is to provide them with access. Here's who you need to talk to. Speak to the teacher first. If you're not satisfied with the resolution, then talk to the principal of the building. And if you're still not satisfied with that resolution, then you would speak to the assistant superintendent in charge of curriculum and instruction. And then if you're still not satisfied, so that you give them, all of the avenues to the top, and explain to them that's not your role. That's not what board members do.
Okay, Susan, you had your hand up next, I think.
Yeah, I also wanted to talk about community engagement, but I kind of more wanted to talk about it in terms of, is it one of our strengths or weaknesses? And might that be a goal of ours? I have always, when I've had to do self-evaluations and board evaluations, had that as a personal weakness. And to some extent, I feel it is a board weakness. And, maybe our goals should address our weaknesses. Even, just as Naresh was asking questions about what you can and cannot say. And there is that gray area about how do we engage with our community? We don't really have a structure for doing that, I feel. And I kind of envisioned that I would go to all the town council meetings and the local school board meetings and somehow community engaged, but shame on me, that hasn't happened. But I kind of feel like maybe there should be a more formal process, or maybe a goal would be for us to examine what we are doing and see if we could be more effective.
Many boards will identify liaisons to a town council. And since you have multiple town
And
councils,
we
Okay,
actually
so-
have, but, and maybe, again, it may just be me, but I'm not doing it effectively. I don't know that any of us are. And again, I'm talking about a personal weakness and what I perceive as a board weakness. And just wonder about, might that be a goal for us?
So I think sometimes when we talk about community, like what is the community we're trying to engage? Is it students? Is it staff? Is it, because if you go to a town council meeting, I always felt like when you go to a town council meeting and suppose you went there, who are you actually telling? You're just telling another board that then has to get it out. So I never quite understood, not that I don't think it might be helpful. I didn't get what the purpose of that liaison was. How does that help in community engagement? If our goal is to make sure parents and staff know what we're doing, or is our goal to make sure everybody knows, like what, that's where I get.
Well, from my perspective, we've got students, we've got parents, and then we have community. And so I think of it as a separate entity of where, of course, the students and parents are all members of community. But I kind of like when we had the recent mascot committee, I think, didn't we name parents, students, alumni, and community members? And when we were going through our, was it our strategic plan, we invited in community members. And so it's that entity that I don't feel that we are effective engagers.
well, you have multiple constituencies and they have multiple ways of wanting to engage at different levels. So it does make it more challenging. It's much easier to reach the students and the parents because they're, for want of a better term, a captive audience, right? They're
True.
right there. So it's much easier to engage with them than it is with other constituencies in your community.
And that's why I wonder, but it seems that it's a need. Otherwise, it wouldn't always appear on these sorts of surveys. And so, we think about the community input on the mascot, or the community input on the Halloween incident last year, or things like that. I just don't feel that we have effective engagement. So I just wanted to put that out there.
I think I fully agree with Susan, whatever she says. That the reason is that when we decide the goals of the board, I do not know what is broken. I do not know what to fix. I do not know what are the problems our school system is facing, what are the problems our parents are facing. One solution could be that the board meets the parents, whosoever wants to meet, without the superintendent and administration, so that they can get the feedback from them. So I personally do not know what are the problems our school has. I do not know where does our school stand in terms of the other schools in the state. So we did have some statistics, last week, but that statistic compared our school performance with the average performance of the state, and not with the performance of the best schools, last top, 5% or 10% schools. So I personally do not know what are the problems we have, what are the problems we are trying to address. Last year, when I attended this course, we were told the board is supposed to lead and not to manage. So oftentimes I feel that we are just managing, whatever we are presented by the administration. We approve the budget, we agree with everything. So we do not know what to lead, do not know what to fix. So what Susan says, I fully agree with you. There should be a process at place where the board could get some unbiased information in the raw form. Where do we stand? what does the community expect. In other countries, the Board of Education it normally has people who are highly educated. They come from university, they have a lot of experience, they know what is needed at the current time. And I find sometimes that that we are missing in our board. We don't have that kind of caliber in our board, that we have some university vice chancellor or a department head of some good university get feedback that this is the new technology, this is where we should train our students. So I never found in last 2 years any interface with the university, like somebody we call from Princeton or from Rutgers or NJIT or Stevens. So we don't have any interface with any of the universities, so I do not know really how we are leading, or are we doing our job right? So these are the questions come to my head. I just feel so many times that I'm not doing my job, what I'm supposed to do.
Well, in truth, you sit on your board as a layperson, regardless of what you do in your professional career. So whether you're an attorney, whether you're a doctor, whether you're an engineer, whether you're a teacher, a real estate agent, regardless of what it is you do professionally, when you sit on your board, you sit on your board as a layperson, and you certainly can use your background and experiences to help inform your board work. But you are not there, if you're an attorney, to be the board's attorney. If you're an engineer, you're not there to advise the BA, around engineering studies, like the HVAC systems, which gave so many districts problems this past year, right, with ventilation and figuring out all of those pieces. That's not your role. You're not there. You are there to represent the community and to be the voice of all students. So I think if you're looking for unbiased information, probably doing, a survey of your community. The board can't be meeting with community absent your administration. Your administration, the board has a role to play, but your administration is critically important in that and needs to participate fully. So you can direct your administration to undertake that kind of survey, to get that kind of feedback from your community members, to see what they believe. I'm sure that there is actually a great deal of collaboration with some of the finest institutions in the state between your school district. You may not see it. That may happen through professional development for your staff and through other kinds of mechanisms that you may just not be apprised of. But I know that that kind of collaboration takes place in Watchung and in many of the school districts. I mean, Liz, perhaps you want to.
I know 2 other board members have their hands raised, but just to clarify 2 things, Naresh. One, that collaboration absolutely takes place. It doesn't necessarily happen at the board level because, as Gwen said, that's not really the role of the board, but it absolutely takes place with our administration. And in terms of determining what the areas of improvement are for the district, that's what we've been talking about with regard to the strategic plan. I don't believe you were at those meetings over the summer when the board discussed the feedback from the engagement phase, which we had a lot of community members respond to with regard to what they felt the district did really well, what they felt were areas to focus on. So at our next board meeting, we are actually going to be sharing the draft strategic plan that the strategic plan committee of board members and the design team have been working on. And that's how the board determines what our priorities are. Because as you know, in any given year, especially right now, I mean, there's a laundry list of things we could choose, to focus on, but obviously we don't have the resources to do that. And we need to figure out what we're actually going to focus on so that we can do it well. And, the board has been very, very supportive with our last strategic plan. And I know that, the board's focus on it and support of it has helped us administratively, focus on what we've determined, what the board and the administration have collectively determined the priorities are. And the process for that is based on community feedback, research, collaboration with schools, with institutions of higher education. So we look at multiple sources to determine what our areas of focus will be. And that, helps us really keep to that diligently so that when other things come up, sometimes there are things come up that we decide do need to be added to that list of priorities because of their importance. And other times there are things that are brought up that we say, yes, these are important, but they're not more important, or at this time, they're not on our list of areas of focus. So they're going to have to wait. So the board absolutely, has a process for that in terms of looking at, what areas, what we do really well as a district and what we need to refine. And you'll be hearing more about that at our next board meeting.
Thank you.
All right, so I think Greg had his hand up for a while.
Thanks, Rita. So first I want to comment in response to two comments and then suggest some board goal ideas. So to Naresh, in terms of referrals for community members that approach you, I think that there are multiple routes outside of just superintendent and principal. For example, Gwen's example of the busing issue, there is somebody responsible for busing that we can refer an individual to help with that. I think for individual student problems, my experience has been that the guidance counselor serves as a very, very good resource for both parent and student to help navigate difficulties that they have. So I would suggest broadening your perception of where referrals can go to help individual parents that interact with you. To Rita's comment about the town council, I think oftentimes the liaison is not helpful because the town council is not really addressing school issues. But I think prior to you coming on this board, we had the issue of a mandatory budget cut and what that amount would be. And there was a critical need for the liaison to be able to work with the town council, explain what's going on, and to be able to negotiate sort of a fair compromise. So I think that role is more of depends on the time of and situation rather than an ongoing need. I want to agree with Bob's suggestion that we continue a board goal that really hasn't been accomplished or has fallen by the wayside. I think coordination with the sending districts, my hope was that was just the first step in becoming not just a regional district, but an all-encompassing district that brings in everybody else. I don't see that necessarily is something that's going to be achievable in a short time period, but I think ultimately the state is moving in that direction, albeit exceedingly slowly. But as budgets become more difficult to manage with a 2% cap, I think we would be better off being proactive in that rather than reactive in that. And I think our coordination with the districts really should be laying the groundwork over the next coming years to become a K through 12 instead of a 9 through 12. That I think would be a wonderful goal to achieve. Communication, second goal, several people have brought it up. I see it as a triangle of board communicating to superintendent, staff, and community at the different ends of the triangle. I do want to commend Liz in responding to our asks for communication to the board. I think that has continually improved over time, and it's very much appreciated. I think that we could do a better job as individual board members in the reverse direction, meaning if we've got concerns or questions about agenda items, that gets communicated in advance of a meeting so that we're not scrambling and wasting time at the time of a meeting trying to gather information that could have been resolved in advance of the meeting. I think that Gwen's suggestion about regular climate surveys is really excellent. We have done this on a ad hoc basis, so periodically we'll do it when something comes up. But I would suggest that similar to our professional services, where we have a regular cycle of looking at each of our professional services and going out for bid in a sense. We should do the same with climate surveys, that there's a regular calendar cycle of addressing staff, of addressing community to get information that would be helpful for us in our deliberative processes. One of the questions that hopefully Gwen can help us answer, I don't know if Rita shared this with you or not, but the staff had asked to meet with some of the board members to discuss board staff relationship. It turned out to be more administration staff relationship than actual board staff relationship, which is what we anticipated. And we did listen. Both Rita and I had communicated with the board in advance of this meeting to make sure that everybody agreed that we would meet with them. Liz was aware of it, and we communicated back to the board the information, and we obviously made no promises other than we did say that during our retreat that we would bring up the topic to see how we could make the staff, one, better educated about the board responsibility and role, and help them understand that we are not making direct decisions that influence their day-to-day activity, nor is that our responsibility, but also figure out legal and acceptable ways to enhance communication between the board and staff. And then finally, a third goal that I think we have also done on an ad hoc basis, but I think is something that we should have as part of our regular process is mentorship. We've, in the historical past, had assigned a mentor to a new board member to help answer questions, and that didn't seem to carry on over time. And as there is board turnover, and we've got the benefit of board members who've been involved in school boards for more than a decade, and we've got others who have only been involved for a year or two. I think some formal process of mentorship to be able to get everybody comfortable with what our roles are and what we can do would be, I think, a really good board goal that is accomplishable in a year. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. And I did speak with Gwen about that one issue. So hopefully we can talk about that a little bit more. With the climate survey, Gwen, I just, and I think I said this also, what issue seems to come up sometimes when we do a climate survey, in particular with the staff, is that it becomes more of an issue. It doesn't seem to focus on educational principles, and sometimes it focuses more about the terms and conditions of employment. So I don't know if that's appropriate to try to drive it in one direction or not, or if it should just be like open and let the staff just explain what their issue may be. That
I would
seems
think
to
that the board's intent would be to have them focus.
Well, I think there needs to be a point of clarification here, because we haven't really done a climate survey with our faculty or staff. The faculty has done their own survey and then brought it to us. And then, you know, there's always debate about the validity and veracity and all this other stuff. So, you know, no surprise coming from me that, you know, that I suggest strongly that we actually annually do school culture and climate survey to be a data point to influence, you know, to address some of the things that Naresh says. How do we know? You know, we've got to go out and we've got to ask, and we've got to objectively look at the information and see how that informs, you know, how we move forward. Not saying that everything that we get back is going to be, you know, 100% accurate or correct or actionable, but it does provide us another data point when we're trying to make informed decisions about direction of the district.
The key is designed by us with some validated metrics as opposed to one designed by somebody else for purposes other than what we would be seeking.
Yeah, and I think that's what Gwen and I spoke about. You even indicated there's certain resources.
We're looking at several tools. The strategic plan committee will actually talk about this next week because that it is going to be one of the action items in the strategic plan. It's actually going to serve a dual role in the strategic plan where it's going to be an action item toward achieving one of our objectives around this. And it's also going to be one of the tools we use as a metric to measure progress on the strategic plan. So that's what we're looking at right now, are a couple of different tools. I actually think on Thursday, Beth, we have a conference call with another group who does a climate survey. But the one of the main aspects that we're looking at is we want to make sure that it fits the context of what we're looking to address. And so the fact that we will ultimately have our draft strategic plan approved with the objectives and the goals, we can then use that to then make sure that what the survey we pick is actually going to measure what we've deemed to be priorities.
Okay, so the district has that, in my mind, that strategic goal is like a district goal. The climate survey may be driven by what, and I don't want anybody to take this in the wrong way, but driven by what the administration sees as the district goals for that climate survey. What I hear Bob and Naresh saying is the board may want different information than maybe what the district wants. And is that right? Like, I'm unclear that, or am I misunderstanding?
That's not what I'm suggesting at all. What I'm suggesting is that we actually do one.
Okay. I just want to be clear because we've kind of went around this a few times, and I myself, even though I've been on boards for years, sometimes it's hard to distinguish between a district goal and a board goal. And in my mind,
And so in this instance, Rita, it is part of a district goal. The end result is it's going to help the board to understand where you are so that you can continue to then move the district forward.
Okay.
In terms of the staff communicating with the board directly, they have a process for that. I'm sure that your administration on a regular basis meets with the leadership of the association and communicates to forestall potential issues and problems, to minimize potential grievances, and the like. The role of the board is around negotiations and communicating through administration the goals. Sometimes the association has its own set of goals and they may not be sharing with their membership necessarily everything that the board does in a way that is accurate, but that's not something that the board can necessarily control, other than making sure, for example, that the minutes are posted in the bulletin boards. And I know this sounds very old fashioned, but just making those available to all of the staff so that they can read and get a hold of them themselves. And it's not someone else's interpretation of what happened, right? Or what the board has done. In some ways, that's a very slippery slope to be meeting with the association. And it generally is not around educational issues. It's more around management issues that are not the purview of the Board of Education, quite frankly.
okay. Susan had her hand.
Because the terms
I also,
of employment are spelled out in the contract,
Right.
which is not to say you shouldn't be concerned about staff morale. That is not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that is not necessarily the way to address it. Someone was going to speak. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
Susan had her hand up.
yeah, I actually, Rita, you said exactly what I have been thinking is a clarification of what's a district goal and what's a board goal. I think shared services and coordinating with sending districts is a goal, a district goal. Is that, and are the board goals to replicate or to support or to prioritize district goals? Or what exactly, or you know, we did a self-evaluation, which made me think that our goals would be where we're effective as a board, or not as effective as a board, and maybe make a goal to become more effective in certain areas. So I sort of need a clarification. I think, you know, one of my top priorities would be for increased shared services, increased coordination with sending district, but I don't feel like that's a board goal. I feel like that's a district goal.
On that one,
Go ahead, Bob.
so on that one, it's actually a little bit of both, from the standpoint where some of the things where we're talking about coordination that the district has been working on about vertical alignment and coordinating, you know, how things are, how students move from middle school to high school, and to make sure that there's some alignment there. I mean, that absolutely is the role of the administration, and they have been addressing it. But when we're talking about some of the shared services ideas and, you know, issues around looking at potential consolidation or doing a study around, you know, shared services up to and including potential for consolidation, that really is a board-driven discussion, and part of that particular goal had Peter and then Rita meeting with the other board presidents, you know, to have conversations around, can we bring everyone together to agree to maybe applying for the funds that are available to do a district-wide evaluation of the viability of doing a consolidation, basically a study, a feasibility study, to see if it is even possible. So those are at the higher level, that's kind of our role. But then when it comes down to how are we aligning our math curriculum and how are we, you know, aligning in some of these other areas, you know, that absolutely is the administrative goal. So I think I wanted to make sure that we kind of differentiated between the two, because they are different. And please correct me if I misspoke on any of that.
You did not at all. I mean, that responsibility around looking at consolidation down the road is certainly a board responsibility, and a board function in meeting with other members of the boards, whether it's their leadership team, whether it's full boards together at times. You know, that legislation that requires regionalization and the pathway to progress, Steve Sweeney, who's president of the Senate, is still promoting. That's not gone away. And so.
Oh,
Gwen, you're muted again.
Especially for the K6s and K8s, as their budgets become more and more challenging, there's more and more pressure to look at that. And they would like to eliminate limited purpose regional school districts. And you are indeed a limited purpose regional district because you're only 9 to 12. The state would prefer to have all districts be pre-K-12. And so, you know, when they reauthorized the accountability regulations, they left all of that in there. Additionally, they left the old dates in there. They go back to 2000 whatever, 2008 and 9. Those dates are still in there for executive county soups to recommend, you know, to the government, to the commissioner, various configurations. That is all still in the accountability regs. So that is an appropriate goal. But to your, Bob's was absolutely accurate. You know, how you articulate the curriculum, how you coordinate your calendars, you know, those pieces are administrative functions. But that shared piece and looking at it probably makes good sense. And it's realistic looking forward, looking to the future, because I think we're going in that direction. You know, the economy has suffered a significant setback nationally, but also in the state of New Jersey as a result of the pandemic. And so there are not going to be likely not more dollars, less dollars. And it's going to make it increasingly challenging for smaller districts to continue without the regional piece. And there
So-
is money available through the DCA, I believe, still for consolidation studies or
And
feasibility.
they announced some more dollars that just came out, I think, yesterday that I forwarded to Tim and Liz and Rita and Greg.
Yeah.
So I hear three things that are coming up, and see if anybody agrees that these might be our way to handle our board goals. So I got continue investigation of the coordination of shared services and regionalization of the K-8 school district constituents. An action plan in my mind that we might be able to get through for the 1 year would be getting everybody on board to the feasibility study, right? And I think that's about all we probably can do in 1 year. If we can do that, I would be really happy. To enhance our communication, that triangle that Greg said between the superintendent, the staff, and the community, and the action plan would be do the climate survey, right? And then 3 is this mentorship idea, which would be really about our board effectiveness. And then in my mind, the action plan is appoint people. Basically, anybody who's new gets a buddy, right? So that we share, we all have to take part in bringing those, because Greg is right, especially we're going to have 2 new board members, one who I think has never been on a board before, and another who has been on a board before, but hasn't been in our community before. And so using our collective wisdom of the people who are still here and making so that we, bring them along. They understand our board culture, our board goals, our strategic plan, and that kind of thing. So what does everybody think about those 3 goals and action plans? Thumbs up from Barry, like that.
I agree.
Can I just get clarification if we're talking about the climate survey piece? So that's really kind of, I guess, in concert with the strategic plan goal, right? So it's
Correct.
kind of
Correct.
coordination of the board and the strategic plan with that.
Right. So that's sort of an easy one on our part.
And the mentorship, Rita, what you're describing is that existing board members are helping out newer board members.
Correct.
That sort of thing. Okay.
Right. But like in my mind, mentorship is really, I don't know if this is possible. Like board president sort of tries to go and say, okay, I think you would be good to help along our new board member. What do you think? And tries to create that relationship.
Yeah, no, it's a good idea.
And I think onboarding new folks in a remote environment becomes even more challenging. So it's probably more important now than ever, as long as you're remote, to make sure that every new board member has someone that they can reach out to for support. And because it's a challenge in a remote environment.
Naresh?
Yeah, so I have a comment here. Greg mentioned that asking questions at the meeting, that comment I fully agree. But in my earlier job at Warren Township, they had a system. If you have a question regarding the agenda or any item in the agenda, you send a question to superintendent, and then he would summarize all questions from all members and respond to them. And he will send every Thursday an update, of the district. So everybody would then get the question and the response. So I think that thing we don't practice here in our district. Suppose I need some information, I cannot send that question to all the board members. I'm limited by our, that I should send only for 3-4 people maximum, should not have the quorum. So by question which I send, it does not get circulated to other board members. But many times when somebody has a question, the person would like that every board member should be familiar with that, because that problem or that question, might trigger some response from other members. So I think in our district, besides these 3 goals, I think we could change some practice that all the board members, whatever questions, queries they have, they can send through email, and the response then should be sent, those questions and the response should be sent to the all members, every Thursday or Friday.
So it was done through an update, you're saying, not through like an email process?
Well, if they actually superintendent send in Warren, sends the update to everybody every Thursday or Friday, what happened during that week. And in that week, he also summarizes all the questions he received and his responses so that everybody knows, everybody's up to the date. So many times I find that something is being discussed and I'm not aware of it, because maybe that particular board member, questioned it and they had sorted out, but other people are not aware of it. So I think everybody should be on the same page. Everybody should know what is cooking, what is in somebody's head, and what is the response. Because questions when somebody asks, they're relevant questions. People spend time going through the agenda, going through the items, and then you would like to see that everybody is aware of it.
Okay, Susan, you had your hand up?
Right. I actually had my hand up before Naresh did. So I just
Sorry,
was
I'm
saying,
sorry.
no, I'm just
I
saying we
apologize.
do have this function where we can do the raised hand thing. So
Yeah.
you can't notice everything, but we did talk about this, Naresh. You brought this up a long time ago, and I thought other people weren't interested. And I do think we should all come up with these ideas, but that particular one I thought had been brought up, and many people were not interested in receiving a synopsis of all of the questions that had been asked during the week. That was my memory. I may be wrong. But I will say, I do also feel as though there are a lot of sidebars, and it was one of my comments in the self-evaluation. I do think a lot of people are quick to go to Dr. Jewett or to Tim or whatever. And I often feel as though I get to a meeting and everybody else has had some conversation. And I was like, well, I don't know what you're talking about, because I think, and I do think it's outside of the committees. So I personally am not interested in some huge list of questions that, if I have questions, I'll ask the questions. But I just wanted to say, I do think there are still a lot of sidebars that maybe are not 100% appropriate.
So in terms of that, we have the committee meetings. What I noticed is that, and there's emails where people email specific questions and get answers to it. And then there is the agenda review that the president and the vice president have with Tim, with the administration. So that's one other area that things may get discussed. And then sometimes what happens is, I think the other area is, and maybe this is inappropriate, I don't really know, is like, if it's an operation question, sometimes if you're an operation committee member and you have an operation question, you then would also copy the operations chair, for example.
Yeah, maybe my use of the term inappropriate was inappropriate.
Okay.
So I don't know. I do feel left out of the loop.
Okay.
Sometimes. The other thing I was going to say, though, again, about this additional document that Naresh is proposing, is that I feel as though we get to the meetings and not everybody has read everything that is available on our documents. And so, this might be yet another thing that not everybody will read. I mean, I do think it is important that everybody understands that they've got to be prepared for the meetings. And there are, most information is available on Google Docs for people to read. I'm not sure everybody does read them.
And just so you know, and I think, you guys know this because we've made adjustments, over the years. Whatever the board wants me to communicate on a weekly, bi-weekly, whatever basis, I'm happy to do that. So it's just a matter of you guys, determining what that is that you want, and what you want Tim, Beth, and I spending time on versus the things that you don't. So if you decide you want to shift things, certainly we will accommodate that. So, whatever you decide will work best, we will make happen.
And the committees are, we have the four, well, really, I guess, three committees that meet regularly, if you don't count the strategic plan. And each year we try to move people around, so you'll be in different kinds of committees. I do find that I can tell you right now that I feel like the operations committee, and some of it is based on what people want to do, right? But I feel like there are certain people that have been on the operations committee for a long time, and they really get it. But then if you're not on the operation, I find that one, if you're not on that operations committee, there are a lot of things that are sort of like, what? Because I mean, I only know more about them now because I've been going to them because I'm the president. But before that, I kind of felt like the operations committee that's the one that in my mind is the hardest to understand sometimes because it can be most technical. So we may want to consider moving people around. I know there are certain people that really are good at it and get it, but I think we may have to think about moving other people into those positions, into the different committees, even if you don't like it.
And we would tell you that rotating through committees is probably a best practice so that you gain over time a broader knowledge of the entirety of the district. And everyone has a committee that they really don't necessarily want to sit on. But sometimes it's very helpful to sit on those committees to learn. You just get a broader base of understanding. And I think to Naresh's point, you just need to have a standardized process or procedure for getting your questions answered, whatever that is. So if it's, you have a question when you get the committee reports and the agenda, you contact the chair to get a response. Or you contact however you want to do it. But I think you ought to have some kind of standardized process by which to get those questions answered so that you come to the meeting as well informed with as much information as you need to make an informed decision.
And would that be something you'd have in a bylaw?
Typically, you could put it in a bylaw. It's generally just an agreement among
That's basically what we have. I think right now it's just a general agreement that you email either the chair or Liz or Tim if you have a question, depending on what your question is, or even Beth if it. But
well,
generally, Liz or Tim.
To that end, if someone has a question and they get a response, and three people reach out to Liz with the same question, I'm sure that the board meeting she's going to make a point of saying, I got a lot of questions about X. Here's the answer, so that you all have it. And I to do it weekly and to compile all of those questions, it may just be an arcane question that nobody else has or cares about. Could be a lot of more administrative work for you. If it works that the committee chairs are responsive to board members with questions.
Right, and the president gets copies on most of the emails. So a lot of times then it would be at the agenda meeting, if I saw like this issue come up, Liz, we need to have, or Tim, why don't you explain during your your comments, the comments, business administrator comments, superintendent, why don't we get this all out? Or even if even if the community is sending something in, that's how a lot of that gets kind of pushed through. Either Liz or Tim will realize that they want to say something, or I'll say, or Greg will say, let's put this front and center and get it out there. And now the board member, the rest of the board doesn't know that's what's happening. And I don't know if there's some communication that should be done to know that, like, don't worry, this will get addressed.
Well, sometimes, Rita, we'll have that conversation where I'll say to you, do you want me to wait till the board meeting? Do you want me to send a notification out to the board now just to give them a heads up? So we try, and sometimes there might be issues that pop up that we should have done that for and we didn't, or, I didn't because I didn't realize that it was, something that everyone was concerned about, but we generally try to do that. And that's certainly something that will, knowing that that's been brought up by some board members, I'll make sure to keep that on my radar as we move forward as well.
My point was that if you had to communicate with all board members, the board meeting is the only venue you have for that, right? But if you have a question and you send it to the superintendent and then she or he circulate to among all board members before the meeting in her update, then everybody would know it and it will not be repeated at the meeting.
And I
was
do that for some things, but as Susan was saying, I do think the board said that they don't necessarily want all of that.
Correct. I understand that part, but I was just responding to Greg's point that many times we end up asking questions, you know, at the board meeting, and which is waste of time. I was just responding to that many times you ask up questions because you would like to see that all board members are familiar with that concern, because there is no
So
other
you're saying
mechanism.
you're not asking because you don't know the answer, but you're asking because you're not sure if everyone else knows the answer.
Well, both. You know, it could be one or the either or both. You know, I mean, what I'm trying to say that many times you are asking something or raising a question because you would like to see that everybody is familiar with that. That is one thing. And oftentimes when I ask question or raise a questions, I do not know the answer. But I'm saying it could be, you know, anything. But at this time, I see that there is no mechanism that a board member can communicate with other board members except at the board meeting.
Well, you certainly can ask if you have a chair, if there's an issue on operations and you want to speak to the chair, for example, you can do that. That's fine. You can
but not
always
all the board
communicate
members.
with me as a board president. That's never an issue. So I'm not, and if you think, for example, that you want to, Bob said something at a prior meeting or a committee meeting and you want to explain, there's no reason why you can't. It's just that we can't all communicate 5 at a time because then we create a meeting, but you can individually talk to people. I mean, I've called different people at different times, one at a time, to try to find stuff out. I mean, that's allowed. There's no problem with that, as far as I know, as long as you're not trying to like court somebody's vote or something.
Exactly. Well, exactly. But also the purpose is for the public to be able to, you know, the purpose of the Open Public Meetings Law is to allow the public to observe your conducting business.
That's true too.
It means that if you were doing it via email by communicating with all the board members or putting out a particular position or asking a series of questions to get to a particular conclusion, it's likely violative of the Open Public Meetings Law, if not in actual law, the spirit of the law.
Right. Our deliberations on certain issues are supposed to be public.
They must be public, the deliberations around a particular issue. So if you have a question that you don't know an answer to, I can appreciate wanting to get a response back. But if other board members have that question, they're going to ask it. I don't think it's incumbent upon other board members to expect to get answers to questions that board members may not have. If that's any help.
All right, so Greg, you had your hand up. Barry hasn't spoken yet. Let's let Barry speak.
Hi, Barry.
Hey, so I'm not sure I understand why one board member couldn't call another one who's on a committee, not necessarily the chair, because let's face it, we each only have so much time, but to say, hey, what's going on in operations? What are you guys talking about? What about education? What about personnel? So you don't have a lot of people on at once. It's one-on-one with another board member just to catch up on what's been going on. And then if you have a real series of questions, maybe you go to the chair or maybe you go to Liz or Rita to get more clarification. But just for someone to call, like Susan called me and say, hey, what'd you guys talk about in operations? What's this about? You know, this is going on, that's going on. You just give her a quick update so she's not completely in the dark. And then if she needs more, then she can get with Liz or Tim, you know, or Rita and get more information if she needs it. But sometimes it seems like things are a little too formal and we just need to be able to catch up on something quickly to find out what's going on.
And I know some of you, do that out of courtesy for Beth, Tim, and I, because you figure if you can give somebody the information rather than them calling us, you do that, and we certainly appreciate that. If you are at a committee meeting and you can catch them up, that's certainly helpful to us. We're obviously happy to talk to any of you, but I know that some of you, take that on just kind of as a favor to us.
Okay, Greg.
First, I'd like to say that my comments weren't intended to preclude or limit questions at a board meeting, because certainly we want active debate and discussion at a board meeting. I think that the intent of my comments was more, if there is information that needs to be gathered, it's going to be very difficult for the superintendent, for the business administrator, to get that information at the tip of their fingers when you're asking. And so if there's something that's going to help the deliberation that we need information on, asking in advance so that they are prepared at the time of the board meeting, I think that's where that advanced question is helpful. A lot of our discussion has been, I think, about board of the whole versus committees reporting to the board. And our K-8 district, at least in Warren, has historically been board of the whole, whereas our 9 through 12 has been committees reporting to the board.
Right.
And there's a lot of a trust issue that has to exist for it to be successful. And what I'm hearing is maybe some of the newer folks may not have the trust, and that's okay. I get that. And that just means that the committees probably are not doing an adequate enough job to communicate. If I can give a little historical perspective for the operations committee as an example, there were a lot of times that we would meet as a committee right before the board meeting, and then we would present a report, except you had nothing in writing and you had nothing in advance to know what was talked about. And if I were not on the operations committee, I would be frustrated with that, because you're just getting the information right away without an opportunity to think about it, ask questions about it other than on the fly. So I think we've improved that system, and I thank Tim and Liz for organizing it in a way that now operations meets in advance. You get a committee report in advance so that you can read it, reflect on it, ask questions about it, and be better informed. I'll tell you my personal perspective. I trust our entire team. I mean, whether you're new or whether you've been on the board for a decade, I trust all of you to do the right job. I think that all of you have your hearts in the right place. And so I'm not going to second guess the personnel committee chair or the committee itself or the education committee chair or committee itself. When they present something, if there is something that really looks odd, I'll reach out, but I can't say that I've really seen that. And I hope that all of you see that from operations as well. If you don't see that, then we're just not doing a good enough job in communicating either all of the information and deliberations, or not giving it to you in advance enough for you to have the time to reflect on it. And so the feedback that I'm getting, and Rita and I and all of us really can talk about it, is how do we get everyone comfortable and trusting that the committee is doing the job that you individually would do the same job had you been sitting on that same committee.
That's a good insight. Bob.
So first of all, I concur with Greg, but I also want to say I concur with the three goals that you had outlined, the way that you had structured them. So when you're ready to entertain a motion, I so move. But in addition to that, I think it's important to understand that over the past 6 years, we've really tried to tinker and refine the committee process, the board process, the committee reports, and largely one of the reasons why we have our working meetings and our business meetings is to allow there to be an extended period of time to review upcoming agenda items. There's then a 2-week period after you've seen them on as a preview item to contact the appropriate person or to raise questions. And one of the reasons why we've gone this way is so that we can avoid the horror shows of 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 hour board meetings. Because everyone here is busy, right? We all have lives, we all have businesses. We have to do something to pay for our habit of being on the boards. So I think it's important to understand that these processes have been set up so that we can be as efficient as possible, but not at the cost of stifling discussion. You know, and I think you've seen where we need to have discussion, we will let the discussion go, but it's helpful for everyone to do their work prior to the board meeting. That means if you have questions in that window before a meeting on an agenda item or something from committee, talk to the committee members or the committee chair, or talk to Liz or Tim or Beth to get the additional information you may need, or for them, as Greg pointed out, for them to have the time to gather the information that you're requesting so that we can have, you know, a meaningful discussion about it and not end up having somebody leaving the meeting feeling frustrated because they didn't get the answers that they were expecting to get at the time. So I would just encourage everyone, and I also concur with Greg, there's trust involved in this process. The reason for having the committees is because we can't all consume all of this information. We can't all be, you know, spending time consuming all of this stuff. So we trust the committees to do the due diligence, to bring the information to us. Then the board can ask questions and dig in a little bit deeper. But it's largely designed for us to be more efficient, not to keep information from people. So obviously that's an area that we can continue to refine, but I still believe wholeheartedly in the model that we're using.
Yeah, and I want to say before COVID, we had some 45-minute board meetings.
And Bob is absolutely right that the committee system works most effectively when there is trust, that the committees are doing the work and are communicating what they are doing to the board ahead of time so that you can ask those questions, get clarification, and feel comfortable that they have done their due diligence. And that makes it much more efficient for all board members when it happens.
Okay. So the process is with board goals, we make a resolution, and did anybody write them down?
Yeah, Rita,
I kind of have chicken scratch, but
Tim has his hand raised.
oh,
I do.
okay, Tim.
Yeah, just a quickie comment. I mean, I think sometimes board members are frustrated because they don't always see the day-to-day stuff and they don't feel involved. And I think the rest, you've said that, and Susan to a degree, but I think you guys have a lot of influence on what we do every single day. And I just hope you understand that by what you ask and what you say in committee, what you ask and what you say in the board meetings, your involvement in strategic planning, your involvement in the board goals, the 3 people, the administrators on this Zoom call on our board, you know, everything you do, and because you're cohesive, especially right now. I mean, there's years when, you know, going back, there's years I think I said to myself, well, I don't know what the board wants. You know, it's just people would ask me, what do you think the board thinks? I'm like, I don't know. But like, this group is very cohesive, and you've given us such a solid direction, and not just in the goals and the strategic plan, but just by your questioning. We know what you want. So it's, you know, most of the time we're pretty much understanding, so we can communicate that on a day-to-day basis, something as small as a purchase order, or, you know, do you think the board would be okay with this? So we have that conversation all the time. So if you think you're not influencing what's going on here, you're really not, you're missing that. You are, because of the questions you ask, the things you do. So I hope, especially this board, because of the way you're just very cohesive group. And funny thing is, you're a very diverse group. You know, you have different backgrounds, and it's interesting to me, but and it's a good thing. It really is. And that's why those scores were the way they were, I think. Anyway, just something to think about.
Greg, you had your hand up also.
Just a quick comment and a thought, not that anyone needs to respond, but to consider going forward, and it may fall under the mentorship goal if we decide to adopt that. It may be helpful if there was an empty slot at every committee meeting, meaning that we would have on a rotating basis folks who are not on a committee sit in on the committee and listen. And that's probably a very effective way to develop trust, because when you see the standing committee members discussing something and how they interact and how they come to decisions, you may get a greater comfort level to say, you know what, I know that this has been vetted appropriately, and I'm willing to accept the recommendation, albeit still trust and verify.
Okay. All right, so back to my process question. Exactly how does that work?
Sorry, Rita, Susan.
Oh.
You're not going to not recognize me again, Rita.
Your hand wasn't up. And now up.
Just along what Greg was saying, you know, I know there's a process for, and I'm a big proponent of rotating committees. You know, I'm the alternate on the education committee. And so this was going to be another thing that I mentioned, which is how crucial attendance is and RSVPing. So we know going into a committee, how many people are going to be there, that we're going to have enough people to vote. So, but I've never been included on an education committee meeting, which tells me there's either 100% attendance at every single meeting, or somebody just forgot about me. And I'm not like pointing to you, Bob, because you're the chair, but maybe
that would be on me. And
maybe it's on you.
I do have to say, because of our committee meetings being via Zoom, attendance is much better. But the one thing, in all seriousness, so the one thing we may want to consider going into the new year, right now, we pretty much have 4 committee members on each committee, plus the president as the ex officio. So that means we have 5, you know, that almost always are present. Whereas in the past, generally of the 4, there would be somebody who sometimes couldn't make it. So then we'd have room for an alternate. But because of Zoom, it's actually improved our attendance tremendously.
So maybe that's it. Or maybe I should have spoken up earlier.
So yes, yeah, no. And so we may want to discuss adjusting that so that there's 3 standing on each committee.
And then somebody rotates in.
For the rotation,
People
because
rotate
I
in,
do
yeah.
think it's helpful. I know on my end, when the president is able to attend the different committee meetings, because then when, you know, they have an awareness of all that's going on, so that when things get brought up by different board members, you know, they have a good awareness of that to speak to it. But I think these are good points. And it's funny. I mean, the attendance problem is actually a good problem that we have, but now we may need to adjust that just to give more flexibility for other board members to attend.
And Susan, if it'll make you feel any better, I'm the alternate on the operations committee, and I have not attended one meeting this year.
I know, I feel bad about that.
I feel better. I feel better. Thank
And
you.
I would leave the alternates in place, because we won't always A, be remote, and B, it may be times if you go to a 3-member committee system where somebody does have a commitment. So that way you have the alternate as well as someone who can sit in.
And another thing that I would bring up is that perhaps if there was an expectation that the committee chair would speak with the president, that way we could potentially still have 4 members and somebody rotating, and the president really is aware of everything, because after the meeting, the committee chair directly communicates with the president and says, here's all the things that we talked about, here you are up to speed. If the group's preference is to have 4 rather than 3 with the president as an ex officio. Again, something we can talk about in the future, but things to think about as we approach the new year and restructure.
All right. Any other hands?
Believe I have a motion on the table.
Do you want me to review what I wrote down as the 3 overarching themes for the goals?
Please.
The one that I may need a little bit more clarification on is the communication one, just in terms of exactly what we want to focus on. But the first one is coordination, and it's really a continuation of one of the current board goals of coordination with our sending districts with regard to shared services and exploring regionalization. I think that's the one. The third one is establishing a mentorship structure for new board members. And then the other one has to do with communication within and among the board, the superintendent, and the rest of the learning community, which includes the staff, parents, students, and the community at large. I wasn't sure if you wanted it more specific with that, or just kind of a refinement, an examination and refinement of our practices, which I know we talked about including and perhaps including a climate survey, including in our climate survey an assessment of this.
That's fine with me. I mean, I use the word enhance, but I don't care. Maybe enhance is sort of like a pretty
No, that we have that
not a measurable.
For the communication one, Rita.
But Rita,
I don't know how.
Measurable is creating a annual climate survey
That's
that
true.
rotates among the different constituencies, and
That's
that's
true.
something we're not doing now.
That's true.
Gee,
The action, right? The action of creating the climate survey,
Or
and then
making
viewing the
it, I
results.
guess, a component of the larger climate survey that the district's planning on doing, making sure there's a component that measures specifically the communication aspect.
Correct.
Yeah, because the climate survey should be happening annually.
Right.
And one of the consultants we talked to, talked about, he said, or like 18 months might be a little more realistic in terms of collecting the data, reviewing it, assessing it, but I think that's really kind of up to us. So, but it's certainly something we don't want to do every 5 years, when we're redoing a strategic plan. We want to be really continually assessing progress.
Okay.
So do we want I don't know if we want to approve the themes for the goals tonight, and then I can write them up and circulate them to the board in terms of formalizing them to formally approve at our next meeting, whatever you guys think a good process will be.
That sounds good to me.
agree with that and second Bob's motion.
Okay. Do we need a roll call on this, Tim, or is it all in favor?
I think this is like an all in favor type of deal, no? No
Okay.
money being spent.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. I think we're good.
Great.
All right. I found this to be productive. I hope everybody else did.
Very.
This is actually great
Actually-
timing too, considering we're going to be
Yeah.
talking about the strategic plan at the next board meeting. So this aligns nicely with that.
Good, good. Well,
And
thank you for the opportunity to be here to do this with you. It's always a pleasure. I look forward to seeing you all in the near future, actually in person. And I want to hear that everything is well with all of you. Please, Liz.
Thank you.
Okay. And
okay,
if there's
thank you so much, Gwen.
You're welcome. Freddie, thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Even though you're behind, I can't see you.
And our Wi-Fi is pretty bad, so when the camera's not on, it kind of saves the connection.
Okay, well, it has been a pleasure.
Thank you.
And if there's anything I can do to assist any of you, please don't hesitate to email me or give me a call. We are here to assist. And I wish all of you a very happy Thanksgiving. And if I don't see you or speak to you, a very nice holiday season as well. It's a pleasure. So,
Yeah.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Gwen.
all right, good night.
Thank you very
I'd
much.
like a time for a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second.